The rain fell relentlessly, hammering against the charred remains of a nameless village. Each drop seemed to echo the devastation left in the wake of war. The air hung heavy, thick with the acrid stench of smoke and burnt earth, mingling faintly with the sickly sweet odor of decay. Amid the smoldering ruins of what were once homes, a lone knight stood motionless. His black armor glistened with rain, and his sword trembled in the grip of a blood-stained gauntlet. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a tombstone. The storm raged on, drowning out the screams of the dead. But it could not silence the voice that echoed in his mind, a haunting whisper cutting through the chaos. "This is who you are." The knight's gaze dropped to a locket hanging open at his belt. The faded portrait of a smiling woman was now flecked with ash. He had come to burn the past, but instead, it felt as if the past was burning him alive. Suddenly, a child's whimper pierced the night, slicing through the storm's cacophony. The knight's head snapped up, his heart racing. The warlord's orders had been clear: leave no survivors. Yet, in that moment, the flames whispered a name he had sworn to forget. The Shadow Knight's armor creaked like a coffin lid as he ascended the citadel's steps. No banners flew here. No guards patrolled the perimeter. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, its iron teeth rusted red, a testament to the fortress's long-abandoned purpose. This place had not been built to defend. It had been constructed to hide. The air was thick with the stench of wet stone and burnt pitch. A fire pit smoldered in the hall, its flames choked to embers, casting flickering shadows that danced along the walls. In a moment of frustration, he hurled his helmet into the ashes. The clang echoed like a tolling bell. The face beneath was gaunt, scarred, older than the man who had once sworn oaths to kings. On the wall hung a cracked shield, its crest scraped away, leaving only splintered wood, a relic of forgotten glory. With a surge of emotion, he tore the locket from his belt. The woman's portrait stared back at him, her smile frozen in time. "You promised her peace." The voice hissed within him. "Look what you've built instead." A raven perched on a rusted chain above him, cackling with a sound that echoed like a mocking laugh. Its black eyes gleamed like dagger points, unyielding and cold. The knight's fist slammed onto the table. "Quiet," he barked, but the bird remained unfazed. Some whispered it was not a bird at all, but another curse he had brought upon himself. He strode to a map nailed to the wall, the parchment stretching from floor to ceiling, marked with charcoal and blood. Burned villages, crushed-out kingdoms, each mark a testament to the warlord's conquests. His conquests. A dagger quivered in his grip as he dragged the blade over a fresh mark. The village he had just razed. One more scar on the land. One more scar on his soul. As he stood there, the locket slipped from his fingers, cracking open on the floor. A lock of silver hair tumbled out, tangled with dried petals. The knight froze, his heart pounding as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, slow, deliberate. He recognized that gate. The warlord's envoy. The door groaned open, revealing a cloaked figure, mud dripping from his boots. He tossed a blooded scroll at the knight's feet. "The master grows impatient," the envoy sneered. "The next raid begins at dawn. The valley beyond the ironwood." The knight's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The envoy smiled, revealing teeth yellowed like old bone. "Then the master will ask, 'What use is a shadow that cannot obey?'" Silence enveloped the room. The raven flapped its wings, scattering ash across the table. The envoy leaned closer, his voice dripping with malice. "Or perhaps you'd prefer to join the villagers in the pyre. They scream so sweetly, don't they?" The knight's hand drifted toward his sword, but the envoy snorted, turning to vanish into the corridor. The door slammed shut, leaving the knight alone once more. He picked up the locket, the silver hair glinting in the dying firelight. Somewhere, far below, the citadel's foundations groaned in despair. 3 years earlier, rain had drowned the battlefield, transforming it into a graveyard of forgotten heroes. The knight, no armor, no sword, crawled through the dead, his tabard, once bright with the colors of a now-forgotten kingdom, hanging in blooded shreds. They had called him a hero then. A fool. A flickering torch illuminated the scene ahead. A warhorse snorted, steam rising from its nostrils as the warlord sat atop it. his horned helm glinting like a crown of knives. Pathetic, the warlord growled, disdain dripping from his words. Your king abandoned you. Your men are carrion. What's left to save? The knight clutched a broken blade, his voice barely a whisper. My family. The warlord dismounted, his shadow swallowing the night whole. Family, he mocked, his voice cold and cruel. A gauntleted hand ripped the locket from the knight's neck, the same one that now hung at his belt. This woman? Your daughter. He snapped the chain, tossing it aside. Dead, unless you kneel. The knight's breath hitched, disbelief washing over him. Liar. He spat, his voice trembling. The warlord's cruel laughter echoed through the rain-soaked air. Your castle burns as we speak. Your wife screamed your name. Your daughter, well, children burn quieter. A primal roar erupted from the knight's throat as he lunged forward. But the warlord caught him by the throat, pinning him to the ground. Choose, the warlord snarled. Die here, or live as mine. A dagger appeared in his hand, its hilt carved with serpents. Swear on their graves. Swear to erase your name, your oaths, your coward's mercy. Become my shadow. Or, the warlord crushed the locket under his boot. Let them rot. The knight's hand shook as he accepted the blade, thunder rolling overhead, lightning splitting the sky. Speak the words, the warlord demanded, his voice a low growl. The knight's voice cracked as he uttered, I renounce my name, my kin, my oath. Louder. The warlord bellowed, his voice cutting through the storm. I renounce them all. The knight roared, the words tearing from his lips, heavy with despair. The warlord's laughter echoed in triumph. Good. Now rise. The shadow knight's boots sank into the mud as he approached the cottage. The warlord's orders echoed in his mind. Burn the Ironwood Valley. Leave no one. But this place, it reeked of thyme and sage, not blood. Was it a trap? Or a test? The door creaked open before he could knock. An old woman stood in the threshold, her hands stained with herbs. There was no fear in her eyes, only pity. Took you long enough, she said, her voice steady. He stepped inside, the warmth of the hearth contrasting sharply with the coldness in his heart. Dried flowers hung from the rafters, and a crackling fire cast shadows on jars of ointments and tinctures. In the corner, a child's doll lay abandoned, one arm torn off. Sit, she commanded, pointing to a stool. He hesitated, his instincts screaming at him. You know why I'm here, he said, his voice low and wary. To kill, to burn, she replied, stirring a pot over the fire. But you hesitated at the crossroads. Why? His hand drifted to the locket at his belt. I don't answer to witches, he muttered. She slammed the ladle down, the force echoing in the small space. You answer to this, she snapped. From her apron, she pulled a twisted root, blackened and brittle. Nightshade, grows where the earth is poisoned. Found it near your citadel. She snapped the root, the sound sharpened the silence. Rot runs deep there, in the land. In you? The knight's sword hummed as he drew it. Enough riddles, he growled. The healer did not flinch. Your warlord fears this valley. Not for its people, for its memory. The shrine here, it remembers what you've forgotten. A vision broke upon him. A younger knight laughed, lifting a little girl onto his shoulders. She clutched the same locket, sunlight glinting in her hair. Promise you'll come home, father. The vision shattered, and the healer's voice softened. You can still keep that promise. His blade wavered, uncertainty creeping in. How? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She opened her palm, revealing a silver key etched with runes. The shrine holds a weapon, one that can break your oath. But to claim it, you must betray your master tonight. The knight stared at the key, the weight of its significance heavy in the air. And the cost? He asked, his voice tight. The warlord will hunt you. Your citadel will crumble. And you, she nodded to the locket, you'll finally grieve. Outside, a horn blared, the sound echoing ominously. The warlord's men were closer than he had anticipated. The healer pressed the key into his hand. Choose, she said, her voice firm. Die as his shadow, or live as your daughter's father. The shadow knight gripped his sword, the healer's key burning in his pocket. Burn the valley. The orders clawed at his skull, but the stench of blood, copper and rot, stopped him cold. This wasn't conquest. This was slaughter. A child darted past, clutching a rag doll, innocence radiating from a small frame. One of the warlord's archers raised his bow, an arrow knocked and ready. Hold! The knight roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. The archer froze, confusion etched on his face. The child stumbled into a crumbling hut. The knight followed, boots crunching splintered wood as he entered. Inside, a woman shielded the girl, her face streaked with ash and tears. "Please, she's done nothing," the woman pleaded, her voice trembling. The knight's blade trembled in his grip. The woman's eyes, wide, desperate, mirrored those of his wife and daughter, the family he had failed to protect. A flashback surged through him, his sword falling, a village elder's blood spraying his armor as the warlord's laughter rang in his ears. First kills always messy, the warlord had taunted. The memory snapped, and the hut's walls creaked ominously. The woman pressed the child deeper into the shadows. "Kill me, not her," she begged. The archer shouted, "Shadow, the master expects flames." The knight stepped closer, his heart pounding. The woman flinched, but he sheathed his sword. "The cellar, now," he ordered. He kicked aside a rug, revealing a hidden hatch. "Stay silent until dawn." Her voice shook. "Why?" she asked, her eyes searching his. He hesitated, the weight of his choices crashing down on him. "Tell your child, not all monsters stay monsters," he said, his voice barely audible. Nightfall descended upon the warlord's camp, the air thick with drunken laughter and revelry. The Shadow Knight slipped into the commander's tent, the shadows cloaking him like a shroud. Maps and orders lay scattered across the table, a ledger naming the next targets, villages untouched by war. The key glinted in his grip, pulsing with a life of its own. The shrine held a weapon, but where? A hand clamped down on his shoulder, and he spun around to face the camp's lieutenant, ale on his breath. "Looking for something, Shadow," the lieutenant sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. "Master said you'd turn." Pathetic. Blades clashed in a flurry of movement as the knight disarmed him, but not before the lieutenant's scream sliced through the night, alerting the camp. The shrine's archway loomed ahead, its stones smothered in thorn vines. The key pulsed like a second heartbeat in the knight's grip, searing his palm. Behind him, torchlight flooded the woods, voices snarling. "Traitor! Coward!" they shouted. He plunged through the archway and froze. The shrine was not a temple, it was a graveyard. Row after row of weathered headstones stretched into the dark, names erased by time. At the center stood a statue of a hooded figure, its stone hand outstretched. A keyhole glinted in its palm, a broken weapon. The knight muttered, his voice cracking in disbelief. "This is what he fears." A roar split the night as the warlord emerged from the trees, his horned helm dripping with rain. "You disappoint me, Shadow," he bellowed, his voice thunderous. The knight grabbed the shattered sword, thorns biting into his flesh. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice fierce. The warlord laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the darkness. "You think that relic can kill me? Look at it. It's as broken as you." The knight charged, blades clashing as the relic screamed in protest. A shockwave blasted the warlord back, splintering oak trees. The knight stared at the sword, its shards glowing white-hot, thorns burrowing deeper into his hand. Blood dripped onto the graves, mingling with the rain. The warlord rose, his helm cracked and his expression twisted with rage. "You still don't understand," he snarled. "That sword isn't a weapon. It's a mirror." He ripped off his helm, revealing a face that was all too familiar. The knight staggered back, horror washing over him. The warlord's face was his own, older, crueler, eyes black as the citadel's stones. "You," the warlord sneered, "are what happens when mercy dies. I am what you become." The knight gripped the relic tighter, defiance surging within him. "No, I'm not you," he declared, his voice firm. "Aren't you?" the warlord taunted, stepping closer. "How many villages have you burned? How many fathers did you slaughter while their children watched? You think sparing one girl undoes that?" The warlord spread his arms wide, encompassing the darkness around them. Strike me down, and you strike yourself. Become the monster fully. Or, he gestured to the relic, drop the blade. Return to me. Together, we'll burn this world to cinders. Rain drummed against the graves, a haunting rhythm. The night's breath fogged the air as the sword's glow reflected in the warlord's eyes. His eyes. Somewhere, far off, a child's voice whispered, "Promise you'll come home." The knight's scarred hand bled onto the thorns, and he declared, "I made that promise to her, not to you." The warlord's grin faltered, replaced by rage. "Then you choose death," he roared. The knight lunged forward, the relic shrieking as it pierced the warlord's chest. But no blood spilled. Instead, cracks spiderwebbed across the warlord's skin, light bleeding through the fractures. "Fool!" The warlord choked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You've killed us both." The knight staggered back, the cracks spreading to his own armor. Pain seared his veins as the warlord disintegrated into ash, his laughter echoing in the night. "See you in the shadows. Wake, father. Your war isn't over." The knight's eyes flickered open, the world spinning around him. A figure pulled back their hood, revealing a young woman with silver hair and stormy eyes, the spitting image of his daughter. He recoiled, disbelief washing over him. This is another trick," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She touched the locket at his belt, her expression softening. "You kept it," she said quietly. "Even after all you'd done." "You're dead," he murmured, the weight of grief crashing over him. "No. Hidden," she replied, her voice hardening. "The healer saved me, smuggled me from the pyre. But you believed his lies, became his weapon." The knight's breath hitched, emotions swirling within him. "Why come back now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She lifted the shattered relic, its thorns crumbling to dust in her grip. "This wasn't a sword," she explained. "It was a chain. The warlord's hold on you." She crushed the hilt in her palm. "But breaking it cost you. Look, the shrine's power is eating you alive," she said, her voice steady. "You have hours, maybe less." The knight staggered to his feet, resolve hardening within him. "Then let it end here," he declared. "No," she said firmly, blocking his path. "The warlord's men still march. They'll raze every village from here to the mountains. Unless you lead them." He laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "They'd never follow me now," he muttered. "Not as the Shadow Knight," she replied. She pulled a cloth bundle from her cloak, a faded tabard, its crest stitched with a phoenix, a symbol of hope. "As who you were, the man who swore to protect the helpless." Wind howled through the graves, a mournful sound that echoed his inner turmoil. The knight's fingers brushed the fabric, memories flooding back. "Even if I could, the cracks," he began. "They'll kill you," she said bluntly. "But you'll die as a father, not a monster." The knight's gaze lingered on her face, the resemblance undeniable. "Will you stay?" he asked, his voice soft. She shook her head, a sad smile gracing her lips. "I have my own war," she said. "The warlord's lieutenants, the ones who truly burned our home.